Now the injection has to take place downstream of what? Downstream of the backflow prevention. Exactly. We got to make sure that this thing is going to be injecting downstream of our backflow preventer so that we don't contaminate our water supply. Now this pump could continue to run if the water supply shut off. Now all that you're going to do is you're going to fill your line full of chemical. But at least it's going to be your irrigation line and not your water supply that's getting contaminated. Now that can be a real problem. You know, and it's a somewhat of a common problem with, for example, center pivots. We'll have a situation where center pivot will be coming around a field and for some reason it will shut down. You know, it'll have a failure. A motor will burn up, or it'll get a flat tire, or it'll get stuck in the mud or something, and it'll just stop in one place. And if there isn't some way to shut the water off to that center pivot, it'll just sit there in one spot and keep watering. Well, if you're continuously injecting, say, nitrogen into that spot and it sits there for 8 hours overnight before somebody notices it, you're going to have an extremely highly nitrificated strip out there through your field. And you know, that little strip's going to be pretty screwed up for the rest of the crop year and possibly into the next crop year, because you may have pumped on so much extra chemical that it's going to really screw up that little strip in the field for a year or two to come. And it can really happen if you're doing something like chemicals, for example, like a herbicide. We use herbicides on corn that will pretty much eliminate the growth of all of the grasses and other broadleaf weeds in a cornfield. Well, if that thing's applying that chemical and it gets stopped in place and you put a few hours of that chemical in a strip, that strip's not going to grow anything for a couple of 3 years, because you put enough of that herbicide in there that it's going to make sure it's all virtually sterilize that strip across your field for the next couple of 3 years. And you can actually see that occurring over the next 2 or 3 cropping years with whatever you put in there. You're going to have a dead spot in your field.
Can you leach it out?
Can you leach it out? Not very well. Most of those chemicals don't like to leach a lot. Nitrogen fertilizer we can leach. Now there's a leachable product. Now what are we doing then? Well, we're driving it down into the groundwater, you know, and then we're creating a different problem. So yeah, we're getting ourselves into a little trouble then. So it can be leached, but what's the consequence of leaching it? Sometimes the consequence might be worse than just having a spot in the field that you're not going to crop for a couple of years. So you have to look at those aspects as in your management. Now when we apply very expensive chemicals or very critical chemicals on those center pivots, the norm is to actually have somebody sit at the injection pump and watch the pivot. I mean, it is one boring job, but it's well worth it in case there is a shutdown, that you do have a human being there waiting to shut everything off. If for some reason the pivot quits moving, or the pump shuts off, or the injector pump shuts off. Any 3 of those things can go wrong. It's going to goof up the process. And so, you know, you get out there and you just sit and babysit the center pivot. And that can go on for, you know, a 24-hour rotation. And somebody has to sit there all night and watch it go. And it is one boring job, yeah, but somebody's got to do it, you know.
BYOB.
Now, the way these injection pumps are set up, I should draw just a little example. Certainly in agriculture, injection pumps are the king. We're going to have in here our backflow preventer, and then downstream of that backflow preventer, we can come into our injection system. And so we're going to have this pump sitting out here to the side, and it's getting its liquid out of a tank, and so it's going to be bringing some liquid down through itself and injecting it straight into the water supply. and then it goes on out the system.